Just a brief explanation of what we're doing this evening, something a little bit different, as you can see. I'll be telling the story, kind of rewritten it a little bit. And there are 4 parts to the story. And then after each part, I'll extinguish a set of candles. And at the very end, when it is finished, I would ask that you leave the sanctuary in silence. Of course, ask that you would turn off all of your cell phones if you have your cell phones on. And as I extinguish the candles, take those moments for prayer and reflection as you consider this is one of the most incredible sacrifices that anyone has ever made, and they've made for each and every one of us in the death on the cross of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
Trees, it was for me, oh Lord, when you cried upon your knees, how could it be, oh Lord, when in blood and sweat and tears, you dismissed your final fears, when you faced the soldier's spears,
And when he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. And on the other side, there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it. Now, Judas, who had betrayed him, knew the place because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the city, from the chief priests and the Pharisees. And they were carrying torches and lanterns and weapons. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it that you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "I am he," Jesus said. And Judas, the traitor, was standing there with them. And when Jesus said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. And again he asked, "Who is it that you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they said. And Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. If you are looking for me, then let these men go." This happened so that the words he had spoken would be fulfilled. "I have not lost one of these that you gave me." And Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. And Jesus commanded Peter, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup of the Father has given me?" This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. The main streets were crowded with people taking long walks after the big Seder celebration. Since this was a time when family members came back home from far corners of the world, it would have been quite a sight, filled with colorful clothing and with constant moving and a constant hum from all the many conversations. But the disciples were not part of that crowd. Judas had left during the meal, and no one was quite sure what was going to happen next. And so the group took to the dark sides of the street to avoid the crowds as they made their way out of Jerusalem that night. Now, it's likely that even though it was the biggest night of celebration of the year, this group walked in quiet silence. And just as they had found the room where they had celebrated the Seder meal, someone had made arrangements to get them the key to the gate of a small olive orchard near the bottom of the Kidron Valley. And as they went inside, they each searched around for a comfortable place out of the breeze so they might find a good place to get a good night's sleep. Jesus asked a couple of them to stay with him for a while, and they walked further in the orchard as Jesus tried to help them to understand exactly what it was that was going to happen. It may have been the late hour, or maybe it was the wine from the Seder meal, but they had a very hard time understanding what he was trying to say to them. And after a few more minutes, Jesus asked them to sit down and to pray a while he spent a few minutes by himself. And once by himself, Jesus prayed about what was going to happen. He asked if there was any way it could just be avoided and they could all just go home. But he ended by simply saying that he would do whatever he was asked to do. And when he returned to the others, they were asleep. And as he was waking them up, before we really find out whether or not he was upset with them or understood their weariness, it was then that the locked gate of the orchard was opened and Judas walked through it. Behind him was a collection of others. Each gospel writer describes the group a bit differently. Some saying it's soldiers and police officers or servants from the high priest and scribes, or maybe a bunch of paid hoodlums. We really don't know for sure. Regardless, Judas pointed to Jesus. Words were exchanged. Matthew says there was a brief scuffle, and Jesus quickly ended that, all leading to Jesus being taken from the olive orchard to Gethsemane, where the disciples stood there, wiping their sleep from their eyes. John tells us they walked back through the streets of the town, actually traveling a good way across the city, ending up at the home of Ananias, the son-in-law of the current priest of the temple, high priest of the temple. So why take them to Ananias? Ananias was in line to become the next high priest and had a vested interest in seeing that this situation with this Jesus person was resolved as quickly and efficiently as possible. Was it normal? Was it a legal step to take? Probably not. But this was one of those situations in which following the normal and legal processes was seen as less important than getting some type of this whole thing resolved. And according to tradition, Ananias was either busy at a party of his own or was actually already in bed and had to be awakened. Either way, the tradition says that Jesus was temporarily put into a cell with other prisoners while they waited for Ananias to get ready for him. Now, today you can actually go and you can visit Ananias' home, and you can still walk down the stone steps into the hole that's in the ground that served as a cell that Jesus was in. The hole is about 20 feet square, and it's approximately 30 feet deep. Now, at the time when they used the cell, there were no stairs to walk down. When a prisoner was put into the cell, a trap door was simply opened, and he was dropped into the hole. And when it was time for him to be tried, a rope was lowered down in the hole, and the prisoner would put it around his waist, and he would quickly be pulled up. This was not a nice place. It had a mud floor, and there were no conveniences whatsoever in there, so whatever was in there was in there. And when a prisoner was yanked back out of the pit, he was usually doused with just enough water to make him presentable, to take some of the stink away before he was dealt with. And some unknown length of time, they hoisted Jesus back up, they took off the rope, and they splashed him with a bucket of water before taking him to the now prepared priest, Ananias. And while this was happening, if we pull our view back a bit from the room, in the dark little space near the gate of Ananias' house, we can see someone standing there. It's Peter. The same Peter who had followed Jesus the first day along the shores of Galilee and had followed him this one more time. Just as we see him, someone else also notices him and recognizes him as one of Jesus' followers, one of those. Peter quickly denied it, knowing that with things as they were, he could be the next one thrown down into the hole. As they waited, it grew colder outside, and Peter moved a little closer to the small fire. It was burning near the gate. And again, someone recognized him, and again he pretended ignorance. And the third time someone came to approach him, either from panic or just from exhaustion, Peter turned away and ran. Inside the house, Ananias was faced with a serious problem. As great as a threat as Jesus was, Ananias had no authority to condemn him to death. Only the Roman authorities had that power. And Ananias knew that Rome really wasn't interested in the theological concerns of these Jews. All the Roman leaders wanted was to avoid any political problems or any real threats that might get back the attention of the leaders back in Rome. As long as they kept the political front quiet, they could keep their jobs. And after a brief conversation with Jesus, which most of our writers tell us was more of a monologue than an actual conversation, Ananias told a group to take Jesus to the current high priest and let him figure it out. Now, John does not tell us how much time with the high priest he spent, but he was apparently smart enough, the high priest was apparently smart enough to realize the real problem here. So he quickly had Jesus dragged through the streets once again, this time to see Pilate, the local Roman official. Now, Pilate had little interest in or patience for all of this Jewish religious nonsense. And it was, after all, early in the morning. And since there was no legal charges against Jesus, he simply said, "You deal with him yourself." But the crowd was getting restless, and that got Pilate's attention. It looked like one of those situations that might erupt into a riot. It was a situation that might end up becoming heard about in Rome and costing him his job. So he realized that he needed to resolve it then and there if he could. Now, whatever else Pilate was, he was no dummy. He'd heard the crowd saying something about Jesus being the king of the Jews. And if someone was actually claiming to be a king, that could be considered a kind of a political threat. And that would give him the ability, the license to respond legally. Now, as John tells the story, Pilate was walking over to where Jesus was being held, probably squinting his eyes as he saw the condition that Jesus was in after all that had already happened. And Pilate spoke to him fairly calmly, kind of friend to friend, saying, so tell me, these folks say that you're a king, that you're really the king of the Jews. And you have to imagine there's a little sparkle in Pilate's eye at that point, because you see, he's just waiting for that answer. You see, as soon as Jesus would admit it, Pilate could get the whole thing resolved, make the crowd happy, and get back to bed where he would rather be right now. But try as he might, no matter how carefully Pilate phrased the question, Jesus did not play the game. He didn't admit it, nor did he deny it. Consequently, without a clear confession, Pilate had nothing on which to base a judgment, a lawful judgment. He was caught between trying to do the correct legal thing and trying to satisfy this mob that was getting out of control. Pilate had one more idea that he thought might make the mess go away. So he reminded the crowd of the custom of freeing a prisoner on Passover. Why didn't they just free Jesus and be done with it all? But that one backfired too. Most likely because everyone there knew the tradition better than Pilate, as it was a Jewish tradition, and had already made the plan to ask for Barabbas instead. And finally, hoping that it might satisfy the crowd enough, Pilate ordered the soldiers to take Jesus to the fortress near the temple and to flog him. Things were quickly getting out of control. Regardless of any concerns about legality that Pilate may have had, the average Roman soldier enjoyed every opportunity they could to punish a Jew, any Jew. They did not like them. Jesus was taken to the open stone floor of the fortress for some savage entertainment in what was called the King's Game. That's what they called it, the King's Game. He was tied to the post with his arms stretched around the pole in front of him, and soldiers rolled the dice made of bones of former prisoners, and they moved the game pieces around a circle that was carved in the stone floor. And the circle had all these little pie shapes in the area carved into it, each one with a drawing. Whichever drawing the soldier's token landed on determined what the soldiers would do to that prisoner. If it landed on the image of the scourge, the soldiers grabbed the little wooden stick with the long leather strips. Each strip had a piece of bone or metal glued to it with blood. And they would whip the prisoner with it. If their token landed on a drawing of a robe, the soldiers placed an old blanket on the prisoner's bloody shoulders, and just for fun, they'd rip it off to open up the wounds. If their token landed on the drawing of the crown, then they took pieces of hedge thorns that had been bent into a circle, and they crammed it with rods onto the prisoner's head. And if the token landed on the cross, well, the rules were clear that you could not actually use the cross until all of the other things were done first. It was no fun. The game would end too soon. Partway through the game, Pilate came to the fortress to see if the crowd was satisfied with the beating and whether they would now go home and end this hassle. But they were not ready to go home. After more time and conversation, Pilate used the one remaining legal option that he had available, and he told the servants to bring him a bowl of water and a towel. It was a simple ritual, And it may not have been a legal one, but as he washed his hands in the water, the message was that he was officially washing his hands of the entire matter. And whatever the crowd wanted to do from here on was up to them. It was time for the one last game piece to be played. Jesus was untied from the pole, and a large, heavy piece of wood was loaded across his shoulders, with his arms tied so that they would not fall off. This would be fastened to another taller pole that was nearby, and the two of them together would form the final cross of the king's game. And one more time, Jesus was led through the streets. The town was now coming to life as morning stirred. And these were the people who 5 days ago stood along the road waving palm branches. The walk ended at the top of the small outcropping of rock in the middle of a cemetery for wealthy Jews just outside the city walls. Since crucifixion was seen as an unclean act, it gave the Romans special pleasure in performing them there, making this important Jewish site unclean in the process. Just one more of those added bonuses for them. According to the rules and tradition, Jesus was stripped of all clothing and was made to lie down next to the pole, and then had been pulled out of its hole. And his wooden crosspiece was tied to that pole, and then two pieces of wood were slowly raised together in the air, lifting Jesus up. For added strength, spikes had been driven through Jesus' wrist and into the crosspiece. Now, experience had taught the Romans that it was important to use the wrist because the hands were too fragile and they might tear and the victim might fall from the cross too early. The cross was slowly raised into the hole until gravity finally took it and it dropped down into the hole. The cross settled into place with a shock that tore at Jesus' wrists. And once the cross was vertical, the soldiers nailed another board below his waist and twisted his legs sideways to push his feet up under his buttocks so that they could nail his feet to that board. What this did, this took some of the pressure off of Jesus' wrists, making it possible for him to literally remain on the cross for days rather than hours. The twisted position he was now in also meant that while he could inhale and take a good breath, the only way he could exhale is to pull himself up with his wrist to straighten himself up enough so that he could exhale. Most victims of crucifixion, and I did not know this, actually died very slowly of asphyxiation, finally becoming too exhausted to exhale. However wonderfully it is represented by the great artistic masters throughout history, crucifixion was not beautiful whatsoever. The soldiers ended the king's game the same way they always did, gathering around underneath the cross and throwing dice again to determine which of them got to keep anything of value that the victim would no longer need. And at some point, Jesus asked for a drink, and the soldier stepped forward with a sponge on a stick soaked with wine. And since alcohol was actually served as a mild pain reliever, it almost seemed as a rare act of kindness in the middle of this horror. However, by easing the pain, the victim might actually remain hanging up there even longer for everyone to see and to be terrorized by. So it was actually just another well-learned, planned step in this process of crucifixion. There was a little group standing a short distance from the soldiers in their cross game. There was Mary Magdalene, quiet in her memories. There was Mary, the wife of Cleophas, someone we really don't know much about. And she is there because of the third woman, who is her sister. The third woman stood there, arms at her sides, her eyes unmoving from the man on the cross. Her thoughts raced back to the well at Nazareth and the angel. And she remembered Bethlehem, and she remembered Egypt and so many other things. Her son, whatever else the man on the cross may be or may become, in her eyes at this moment, in this time, he was her son. No more, no less. And at that moment, Jesus' eyes connected with hers. And for one very brief moment, as he said, "It is finished."